All right, you guys, how's it going? Um, this first video here is just going to be a recap on how to approach posing in Zbrush. And I know we've already covered it, and I know that many of you, if not all of you, have already begun posing your character. I just wanted to have something to serve as a point of context for those of you who either are struggling with it or haven't yet got there. So here, the only caveat that I need to throw out there is that this character that I'm working with here doesn't have any clothing. And so since most of your characters have some form of clothing, I'll try to talk through as much as I can how to approach that. And just know that if we're using all the same tool, which is T-pose mesh down here, it should be relatively straightforward. All right, so once you have your character and everything loaded into Zbrush, and I've already covered how to get out of Maya and come back into Zbrush. Hopefully you guys all remember how to do so. In case you don't quite remember how to do it, you basically want to make sure that from Maya, you take your finished topology that you've created for your original sculpt. You take that topology and you just want to export it as an OBJ, okay? Once it's exported as an OBJ, and make sure you're exporting every particular piece out by itself. So for example, for me, it would have been the skin as one OBJ, and the eyes would be another OBJ. And anything else that needs to come along with it, I would treat all that stuff as a separate OBJ. Okay, once you have that OBJ exported, we would basically be at a point where we can import that geometry into Zbrush. And now, just to kind of talk through that real quick, and I'm hoping this is just review for everyone, and you don't need to see that in action just at this point. But basically, once you open up Zbrush and you have a clean canvas here, you're going to go to import, you're going to select that OBJ wherever it is, you're going to say open. It's going to go ahead and load it in this palette right here where you see my cursor hovering. And then once you're at that point, you basically want to draw out that geometry the way we've done in the past. In the viewport, you're going to hit T to basically enter edit mode. And then you'll basically be where I am right here, at least with that first initial OBJ. If you have additional OBJs like a shirt, pants, shoes, hat, whatnot, things like that, you basically duplicate this first import that you have here, this first subtool, you want to duplicate it, just like that, and then you would go ahead and import your next item, and it would just overwrite that duplicate, and so forth and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward to get everything loaded in here. And like I said, again, we have covered this, so I'm hoping that that's just a brief recap on how to do that. Now once you are in Zbrush and you're ready to start working, I'm just going to cover just basic functions with transpose, masking, to kind of go in here and start posing out your model. Obviously, this character has a kind of a modeled in expression that I have here. So don't mind that too much. I'm not going to really talk too much about the face here, just mainly more the broad strokes. Okay, so we have everything loaded in, ready to go. So if you're using my GUI that I've given you guys earlier in the term, down here at the bottom where you see T-pose mesh, that's essentially the tool we're going to use for your characters to kind of get going here. If you're not in this GUI, where you want to go to find that is over here at the top where you see Z plugin. If I expand that menu for a second, you're going to go down to the very bottom, almost at the bottom, where you see transpose master. And if you expand that, that button is literally the same as what you see down here. Okay, so again, that's over Z plugin, transpose master, and there we go. So you don't have to use the UI that I've provided, but if you do, it'll be a lot easier to follow along because I have everything here. And it'll be one-to-one. Okay, so let's get going with a little bit of posing here, and this will be a recap from what I did in class, but hopefully something for you guys to use here. So the first thing I'm going to do, make sure whatever subtools that you want to basically pose are visible are actively visible. You'll notice that I have a couple other subtools here that I purposely have turned off. I don't even know what this one is here. So I'm going to keep that off. And this one's just a duplicate of the skin. I'm going to keep that off as well. So all I really want, at least with this model, is just the skin and just the eyes. Okay. I'm going to hit T-Pose Mesh. And it's going to essentially create a temporary subtool at the lowest res setting that geometry offers. Combine it all into one so that I can go in here and start posing this out. Now here's why this is nice to have like this, because if I want to do some broad stroke posing, ideally you want something that has a low res cage. Hence the reason why you guys went into Maya and retopologized all your high res sculpts from Zbrush. Okay. All right. So now we're at this point. We have this thing in a T-pose setting. It's all low res, as you can see. It's all combined. So I'm going to hit W on my keyboard here. And you're going to see this little transpose tool that appears. In my case, it's appearing right down here at the bottom. I want to make sure I'm in symmetry mode. So let me hit 6 as well. I'm sorry, not 6, X. And you can see that now my cursor is symmetrical. So again, if I hit X one more time, it turns it off. If I hit it again, it'll toggle it back on. And now from anywhere on the geometry, if I just drag out from that initial point that I dragged out, I'm basically anchoring this transpose tool. Now W is to move, E is to scale, and R is to rotate. And another cool thing, that's one thing to kind of drag out. If I hover over like this very far orange circle, I can select that and just kind of rotate it to kind of figure out the axis I want to basically manipulate this geometry from. And if I hover over the center orange circle, I can move that around. And the same could be done with the first orange circle, where I can reestablish where I want that anchor point to be. Okay. So in this case, I want to just rotate that arm down, for example. Right now, if I was to do so, this is what's going to happen. It's going to look really funky. Nothing like what you would expect would be happening. So we have to basically first establish a mask for the area that we want to affect with this posing tool. Now, one really cool thing that you can do with transpose, so if I hit W again and then enter that transpose mode, if I hold down Control and just drag out, you'll notice that it's literally kind of automatically applying a mask on this geometry. And the more I drag out, the farther it goes. So if I want it to be right along here in the shoulder, I'm just going to drag it out to about there. Okay. And now only the area that is not having a mask assigned to it will be influenced. So now I'll go ahead and adjust this manipulator, get this transpose tool to be anchored where I want it, kind of mimicking a shoulder joint there. And now we want to make sure and drag this back as well. There we go. Now let's hit R for rotate, and I'm simply going to start rotating this down. And I'm also going to move it. When I pose this kind of stuff, I try to be somewhat thoughtful to how I think the geometry would be affected. Now here you can see some collapsing and all that stuff. We're going to basically fix that in a little bit. Now I'm going to rotate it down just a little bit for now. Let's go ahead and clear that mask. And now, obviously we see a lot of collapse in there. That's not a very natural bend. So what we want to do is now sculpt fix that. Now I want to do this when everything is low res. So what I'm going to do is select my move brush, but instead of using the standard move brush, I'm going to use the move topological brush. Now, if you just press down on any of these brushes, as you guys know, you'll get access to this whole menu. And right here we see move topological. I'm going to select that. Make sure symmetry is turned on, so I'm affecting both sides. And I'm going to start just kind of massaging this geometry, getting it all down to where I'm basically fixing the form of this. Now, this is the beauty of working in ZBrush for posing, is you have real, true control over the result. So I can use a tool like transpose to basically do the broad strokes. And I can use all the benefits of the different sculpting brushes to basically adjust this as needed. Now let's say I want to go a little bit further down with that bend. What I'm going to do is I can either go back into transpose and hold down Control once again and get, you know, another mask in place. So let's do something like this. And if I want to have a more of a smoother fall off there, I can blur that mask. So I'll go down to the masking menu. When you see blur mask, I'm just going to hit that once, maybe twice, and you'll see that it just softens out that fall off there. So again, let's try to mimic this joint. I'm just simply going to bring that down. And now let's see if we can do a little bit of angling to that. So before we do that, let's do a little sculpt fix in here. Go ahead and start moving this stuff down as if those muscles are really collapsing down the way they would if you were to drop your arms. Here we go. Try to get something a little natural in here. And now let's kind of look at doing a broader stroke type of thing. So I'm going to introduce you to your next masking tool that you can do here. Up here at the top, at least in my UI, I have this mask glass. So I'm going to select that. You're going to get this little pop-up that pops up. Just say OK. And now I'm going to hold down Control and start dragging out. Let me do that again. Start dragging out a shape just on this torso part. Add this one to it. So you can see I just want that top part to be masked. I'm going to go ahead and blur that just to get a nice fall off right here in the midsection. And now I want to invert that mask. So I'm going to hold down Control and I'm going to tap here in space and it'll just invert this. And now I'm going to turn off symmetry. So I'm going to work asymmetrically at this point. Let's hit R for rotate. And from right about here where you see my cursor hovering, I'm going to hold down Shift and just drag up. If you hold down Shift, you'll get a nice straight line when you drag that out. And let's adjust this so that it's relatively around where the spine is. And now let's give a little twist to this. We can adjust a little bit. Give a little angle, so just bear with me here. I'm going to try to get like a nice little subtle pose happening here with this guy. So let's say I like how that looks. I'm going to basically clear out the mask. And now I want to affect the head so I can turn this head a little bit. So I'm going to hold down Control again. And just draw out another mask. Let's blur this mask once more. There we go. Now I'm going to drag out my transpose tool one more time. And now simply hitting the R again for rotate. I'm going to rotate again from this middle interior circle so that I rotate along that axis. And I'm going to deliberately try to get some kind of interesting angle to this. Maybe something like that is kind of cool. You can see I'm pretty freely moving this thing around. Let's go ahead and execute that. And then what I'll do is I'll look at everything that I just done And I'll start going in and just kind of sculpt fixed in little things. So here's where I can emphasize like some lines, you know, maybe this gets pulled out a little bit as he rotates his neck like that. You know, you can have really a lot of fun just freely sculpting this stuff. And now let's try to do something with the angle of the shoulder that maybe we can get something a little funner in there. So let's try holding down control once more. Just gonna drag this out. I don't really have a destination with this pose, so to speak. I'm just kind of freehanding this, but hopefully something starts to come to mind here. If I want to remove part of the mask, I can hold down Control and Alt, and you'll see that it becomes a minus symbol versus an additional symbol, and then I can just drag out a certain area. So let's go ahead and blur this, invert it, and let me see what happens if I angle this a little bit. See if I can find like a good angle for this. That seems kind of interesting. Let's just go with that for a second. And now I'm going to hold down Control and with W pressed on the keyboard to go into my move tool. I'll go ahead and drag this out. Let's go ahead and blur that as well. And of course, I can kind of go in and freely adjust as needed. Let's give this a little more of a natural bend. And we'll blur this out. I'm just slowly trying to introduce little subtle shifts. So you can see, just to get that arm down and responding in a way that I'm happier with, at least. It's a little bit of a process, right? Like it's not just as simple as bending it down and calling it a day. So of course I would continue on doing this type of process, making sure I have, you know, some clever masking that I'm doing, some, you know, initial arrangement of the models that I need to pose. And let's say that I like what's happening here with this. Once I'm done with this, or at least with this pass, I'm going to go ahead and hit T-pose to sub-T right here. And that'll go ahead and pop everything back in place. You can see now my higher res geometry is there, just with a slight little turn. And one thing that I can do at this point is, since I have subdivisions assigned to this, here's the base level that I imported. I can subdivide it. You'll see that now I have some funkiness happening in certain areas based on what I did. Now I have the luxury of going in and just simply smoothing things out. You know, I can go give it different types of details that I want to give. You know, naturally, none of you guys are doing anything this specific as far as with your characters or anatomy or anything like that, but you can see the flexibility you have here in working with this. So I have the ability to just kind of freely sculpt. You know, we're just trying to make a nice presentation here. And maybe we can take this leg and do a little something to it. And so here's another thing I wanted to show. You don't always have to be in transpose to do the posing. So I can take this subtool. Let me go down to the lowest level that I have here. And I'll go into my transpose tool and hold down Control. And I just want to affect this leg. Make a better selection of that. There we go. Now let's blur this out. And let's just simply move this a little forward. Not the most dynamic pose I've ever done in my life here, but just something to quickly articulate the idea. I'm going to go to this other side here. So now I'm basically just giving like a simple lean kind of pose. Just something to where he's somewhat in action here. Let's go back to this arm here. Blur that out, and I'm essentially just going to take this and rotate it forward. Let's take this one here, blur it. You can see me going to different angles just to kind of adjust the anchor points. Let's rotate this one back. You can see where I'm going with this, like just trying to have him in a little bit of like a stride, in between stride here. But I really like to adjust lines when I'm posing and try to find like really clean lines as best I can. And again, we'll just take this and simply give this a little more natural appeal. Okay, so nothing too crazy that I'm doing here. In fact, I would argue that this in some ways is even simpler than some of your guys' characters that you have to pose, simply because I'm just dealing with a skin here. But for many of you, I would want you to you know, treat each portion of your model very nicely and intricately. Okay, it's very simple pose. Of course, you know, I didn't do anything to the hands or anything to the face, but you would approach it all the same way. Okay, so that's just a recap of posing for something really quick. And I'm going to now do a second recording, and it's going to be more on rendering and presentation. All right, thanks, guys.